me. Singing from the heart now, stop shooting, all is free. Was it cool to get down on it when Charlie Dog read 3 degrees? There's a song, let's sing it, baby. I love my tunes with cheese. I'm not to chase the brown star while others feel a peach. Now if I need to get away, I drive down to the beach. They'll serve you up some fat fish, and you can dip your hair and bleach. If you treat them on no syllables, it sounds just like a speech. Ooh, you're my number one. Forever, forever on the run. You go back to the cleaners, then you're hungry out to dry. But I'm hungry for your loving army. Don't ask me why. Checking out the roof, babe, I'm gonna be out of here. I can see those waters rising, feeling washed up and full of fear. You can build your own boat, baby, and go right out of town. Or we'll be stranded here forever, chained to the ground. You're my number one. Forever, forever on the run. You go back to the cleaners, and then you're hungry out to dry. But I'm hungry for your loving, honey. Don't ask me why. You're my number one. You're my number one. My number one. Why this man carrying guns, walking, shooting at everyone? Is it all they want, or is it pleasure, pleasure and pain? You're right, they can't keep me safe from the bombs coming down from every place. Is it right, or is it wrong? Or everything seems to be forgotten. Is it clear to the world to know I'm suffering in pain? I'm running, running from the bullets in the air. They're everywhere. I'm hiding, since there's nowhere to go. I don't know, I'm trying. Well, am I the victim here? I really cannot tell. I really cannot tell. 'Cause when I look around, I see no one there. They all seem to disappear. Is it right, or is it wrong? Or everything seems to be forgotten. Is it clear to the world know I'm suffering in bed. Brother, 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 tell me, why are we killing each other in every way? Why can't we all be together? And there won't be anything such as pain. No pain, no pain. Is it right? Is it wrong? And everything seems to be forgotten. Is it clear to us to know I'm suffering in bed? Brother, 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 tell me, why are we killing each other in every way? Why can't we all live together? And there won't be anything such as pain. I don't know what to do. I'm running circles too. I think I'm going crazy. All of my feet on insane. I keep telling myself there must be something else. Show me the way. I don't know. I don't know. Brother, brother. Oh, brother, brother. Brother, brother. Brother, brother.
no, no. I wonder who forgot the word that we all heard. No, no, no. But I don't wonder about you. I know exactly why I fell in love with you. 'Cause you are you and we can be all the things that we both see. Up is down and over is under, that's why I need never wonder. I wonder how to turn to stone, to walk alone. No, no, no. I wonder when they call the past way too fast. No, no, no. I don't wonder about you. I know exactly why I fell in love with you. 'Cause you are you and we can be all the things that we both see. Up and down and over and under, that's why I need never wonder. I don't wonder about you. I know exactly why I fell in love with you. 'Cause you are you and we can be all the things that we both see. Up is down and over is under, that's why I need never wonder. Under the surface, diving in too deep, new light, new faces. Minds falling asleep. Salvation. I'm drowning in uncertainty. Life is going on, and I'm sorry for every word I said. And every lie I still command. But I can't regret the things I've done, 'cause I need the movement. And I say hello to the light, follow infinity. I keep going this way 'cause it feels okay to be here. Just fade away. No time, no space, no trouble to erase. I don't want to return. I say hi to the new life. Staring at me, no complication. I still this disagree. Dilation, floating in the dusty cloud, flying nowhere, and I'm thinking about the flashbacks in my head. About the past seems over. I keep running straight across the street instead. Feelings undercover. And say hello to the light. Follow infinity. I keep going this way 'cause it feels okay to be here. Just to fade away. No time, no space, no trouble to erase. Don't want to return. I say hi to the new life. Hello to the light, with all infinity. I keep going this way 'cause just to fade away. No time, no space, no trouble to erase. Don't want to return. I say hi to the new life.
They just visualize the pressure. First you need somebody cracking under the string. Is that you? Somebody's trying to be or something.
Everything else was left. I'm driving down this cold interstate and I feel so alone. Left everyone back at home without a simple goodbye. Oh, how I would have cried if I had seen your face. Stand like me, stand, don't go. I need you so. You held me still when I needed coming round. You prayed for me, even though I know you don't believe. You stood by me through my darkest hours. You never judged me for who I really am. And I thank you, my friend. I never thought I'd get this far without you here holding me up. I'm sorry I never return your call. I know I just break down and cry and come back home to the place where I feel like I don't belong. Oh yeah. You held me still when I needed coming round. You prayed for me, even though I know you brilliant. And I thank you, my friend. You held me still when I needed common ground. You prayed for me even though I know you love me. Still find me through my darkest night. Never judge me for who I really am. And I thank you, my friend. Never judge me for who I am. And I thank you, my friend. Never judge me for who I am. And I thank you, my friend.
Who has one?
We do.
We do as of today.
All right, ladies and gentlemen,
We are
everyone, have your attention. Well, it's just past 7. I promised the internet will start now, so that now we must start. I'd like to have the audience give our panelists, the TAG, the W3C Technical Architecture Group, a very warm welcoming applause. All right, before we get started, there's like 2 minutes of housekeeping. Bear with me. First, thank the sponsors. Number 1, Wikimedia. They provide us with this beautiful office, a live streaming opportunity, and everything else here. You all know Wikimedia from, of course, Wikipedia, but they're also involved in Wikidata, a lot of policy. Sorry. A lot of government policy involvement in Germany. So if you want to know anything more what Wikimedia is doing, aside from doing that encyclopedia thing, talk to Abram over here. All right.
Welcome.
Thanks. Next sponsor is Hoodie. It's my humble open source project. It's a very nice web application framework. You should check it out. We're providing drinks and food tonight. If you have any questions, ask me or Stefan over there. And Christoph next to him as well. All right. And that's the end of our slides. 2 more items. Restrooms down the hall. Smoking out of the entrance where you came in to this office, but not to the front of the building, but to the back of the building. It's very important. No smoking in front of the building. Don't ask, just don't smoke there. There's signs how to get in and out, and we'll all be fine. I think with that, I'd like to start the round with going through the panel and everybody say a few words about themselves, what they do, and why they're here. And when we're through with that, we want to turn this into a discussion. The reason why the W3C is doing this is because they want to be part of the web as a communication partner, not as a top-down organization that hands down standards that everybody then has to live with. They want to, in the process of developing standards, have a communication with the people who have to live with them later to make them good enough so that we're all not angry at stupid standard stuff, right? So this is an opportunity to start a conversation. Please be gentle or not if you're angry. We'd like to hear from you, especially they like to hear from you. If you have any gripe with any existing or in progress standard stuff going on, tell them. They need to know because they can fix it now. Well, they can try at least. And then as the rules for you, there's a bunch of mics up here. We need to talk into the mics, otherwise the recording will not be the thing that we want it to be. And I have a mic to run around through the audience. Rule is no speaking without the mic. We'll start with Daniel.
Okay, so hi, my name is Daniel Appelquist. I am one of the co-chairs of the TAG group, along with Peter and Tim, and I'm the one that's usually introducing these TAG developer events. So I never have to actually say what I do, so I don't really know how to answer that. But I have been active in mobile and in the convergence between mobile and the web. And that's something that I'm really passionate about, and something that I'm trying to bring to the TAG. And as well, I've been trying to bring to the TAG and also to W3C in general more focus on developer outreach. I'm not the only person working in W3C who's doing that, but there's a general trend towards trying to do more outreach to developers and make sure that the W3C is an open community. And I think that this event is an example of that, but I hope that you'll see more of it as well.
Excuse me. My name is Mark Nottingham. I've been a member of the TAG since, last September, I think? And I spend time in the W3C and also in the IETF. I work on a lot of HTTP stuff. And I'm also interested more recently in work around security and especially privacy, and figuring out the intersection of how that matters to the web.
I'm Peter Linss. I work for HP, co-chair of the TAG with Dan and Tim. I'm also co-chair of the CSS working group, and I'm one of the original architects of the Gecko layout engine. So my role at the CSS working group is trying to get the web to be more printable, more friendly to paged media, and make the web a better platform for digital publishing, that sort of a thing. And with the TAG, my main focus is to try to make the TAG itself relevant. Years ago, you'd ask people, you tell somebody about the TAG and they say, what's the TAG? That's their first response. So we're trying to fix that situation, which is one of the reasons why we're having these sorts of outreach events.
I'm Hadley Beeman. I am, in addition to being on the TAG, I'm the chair, one of the co-chairs of the W3C Data on the Web Best Practices Working Group. I'm particularly interested in unintentional reuse of stuff that's been posted on the web, open data especially. And in my day job, I advise the UK government on their technology policy. So I'm also interested in the connections between what we build and how it's used in the rest of the world.
My name is Tim Berners-Lee. I started the consortium about 20 years ago so that people could develop new standards, and the people who were excited and interested could get together and do that. And we started the TAG because the people who were developing standards every now and again would come up with a great idea, and somebody would say to them, you can't do that, that's against web architecture. And so people say, wait a moment, what is this web architecture? Can you write it down? And so the TAG was formed partly to write it down. In the early stages, that's what it did produce this now a fairly ancient document, the architecture of the World Wide Web. But also at the same time, it also produced findings about things, and it also was designed also to answer questions, and it has a certain responsibility really for the glue between all the various blocks. So when you work on a piece, then in the working group, then it's very easy to get to get fixed on the one block you're working on. The TAG is supposed to make sure everything fits together into a coherent whole in the large and in the long run.
So I'm Yves Lafon, W3C team. I used to work on CSS back when it was CSS 1. Then HTTP 1.1, then HTTP bis, and many other things like that. So I'm helping the TAG since a few years.
I'm Alex Russell. I'm a software engineer on the Chrome team. I work on service workers and progressive apps and help design web components and that sort of thing. But I also serve on ECMA TC39, which is the standards body for JavaScript. So if you hate the way promises are designed, come find me later and buy me a beer before you beat me up. Yeah.
I'm David Barron. I work at Mozilla. I've worked on mostly various CSS and layout things. Lately, working on off-main thread animations, and I've been involved in CSS standardization for quite a while.
I'm Travis Leithead. I'm the member from Microsoft, and there I work on the browser. I do the interfaces between the JavaScript runtime and the DOM. So my interest is in the area of programmability and features like that. As far as interest on the tag, I'm keen on seeing, like Tim mentioned, a harmony of all of the specifications that are being developed around the different working groups in the consortium, helping to make sure things are in harmony there and working well, liaisoning between the groups.
Hi, I'm Jan. Wow, that's loud. I'm a security engineer at Yahoo, working on end-to-end email encryption. I also am a tech fellow at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, mostly working on a project called Let's Encrypt. And I also used to maintain HTTPS Everywhere, which is part of the Tor browser, and Secure Drop, which is a whistleblowing platform. So mainly I'm interested in helping people be safe, private, anonymous on the web, and particularly how can we get sites to all use HTTPS.
All right, thank you. Any questions?
Okay.
Oh.
Well, I should maybe say that just elaborating on what Tim said, the work of the tag tends to be, well, like we're not actually writing standards, right? So what do we do? Okay, well, one of the things that we do and that we're going to be spending a lot of the time of our face-to-face meeting, and we're here for our face-to-face meeting, hosted by Yandex, by the way, so thank you to Yandex for hosting us here in Berlin. But we're here for 3 days. We're going to be spending a lot of the time tomorrow at our face-to-face meeting on spec reviews. So what does that mean? That we do a lot of reviewing other people's specifications, feeding back on those specifications, trying to give them guidance on architectural issues. We spent a lot of time today talking about web security and talking about the relationship between, the kind of movement towards HTTPS everywhere, as Jan said, and we in fact issued a finding earlier this year, which was securing the web that Mark wrote, which was about moving the web to HTTPS. So that's something that's taken up an awful lot of our time. We've also been focusing on topics such as the extensible web, which I don't know how many people are familiar with the extensible web manifesto. Yes, a couple of people. Good, so that's interesting. So that's an area that we could talk about some. The idea of extending web technologies to script. Particularly, there's some very good work going on right now in the CSS kind of area on that. So those are a few of the things that we're working on this week, for instance.
That wasn't a question, Dan.
I know, but I'm just kind of giving people some stuff that they might ask us about.
I have kind of more of a meta question, so I hope it's okay. I wonder if you could talk a little bit.
Who you are.
Sorry, hi. I'm Nick Stenning. I work for a very small nonprofit, which is making web annotation technology. We are a member of the Web Annotations Working Group. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about kind of, working practices of highly effective working groups. When you review specs and you look at things and you go, wow, that's awesome, we can just rubber stamp it and say, make it a TR. What are the characteristics of the working groups that make specs like that, and what are the characteristics of the working groups that make you cry into your coffee during your face-to-faces?
Can I take a shot at this? Is that okay? So in addition to all the other stuff that I'm apparently supposed to be doing but don't do a very good job at, I'm also responsible for the Chrome team's standards engagement efforts, sort of writ large. And so as part of that, pretty much everything that we do on the Chrome team that intersects with the standards body is my responsibility, even if it's not my fault. And so I get a lot of war stories about what's working and what's not from the very large number of engineers that we've got who are trying to make forward progress on these things. And so one of the things that I notice from those conversations is that the people who make the most forward progress are the ones who prioritize, I won't say private, but definitely small early conversations that build momentum over time and get a lot of early iterations in, which frequently has the behavior of not involving a working group until relatively late in the process. Right? There's this thing that happens where people take a tender and new idea to a very large, well-established working group, and they watch it get crushed under the weight of 1,000 questions that they can't answer yet. And there's no immaculate conception for new features. That doesn't happen. Nothing forms fully sprung from the head of Zeus. You sort of have to put in the work and go do the, the real legwork of like finding users and working with implementers to go make sure that you've got a thing that holds together and really solves a real problem. And doing that in a sort of a safe space. I like the way that W3C has opened up community groups as a place to do that. WhatWG has a lot of that flavor, but major working groups, like the ones that you've heard of, are probably not a good forum for doing that early work. So doing that early work, putting in that effort, doing it on GitHub, doing it someplace in a safe, protected space, that's the primary advice that I'd give.
Another good example of that is the progressive images stuff, I think.
Before we created the Data on the Web working group, I chaired the Government Linked Data working group. So I've seen this through a couple of different situations, just building on what you were saying. The stuff that's been the most successful, in my experience, has been the stuff that has the most adoption or use cases, the stuff that sort of makes the most sense intuitively. We do end up with proposals or people coming forward with an idea that's literally, I spent a half an hour on a whiteboard and this is the way the world should work. And the entire W3C process, from my perspective at least, is set up to make sure that we don't end up putting our name and the weight of the architecture of the web behind something that's just something someone put together from half an hour on a whiteboard. So the more there is real-world implementations, the more there's actual practical uses and problems that the new feature solves or the new spec solves, the more successful things will be.
And just to reinforce that, we see exactly the same thing in the ITF. HTTP2 started that way, WebRTC started that way, OAuth started that way. You get implementation experience. The other thing that comes to mind is having a group of people who can work together well is really critical at that stage. And so working groups that don't meet physically, in my experience, fail really easily because you don't understand how the other people think. And so face-to-face meetings, yeah, you talk about issues, you talk about the specs and plan for that, but really it's about socializing the group so people can work together when they're half the world away from each other.
Does that answer your question?
It goes a long way to do, so thank you.
Right. Do we have follow-up questions? Over there.
While you're going there, I just want to comment. The flip side of that is the socialization is hugely valuable, but it does make me wonder if we only end up writing specs with people who we would sit in the bar with.
People gnash their teeth about that one a lot. Yeah.
I don't know a way through that. If any of you have solved the socialization problem, let us know.
Okay, hi. I'm Tankred. I build an open source PGP mail client, and we use like Chrome apps to ship this. We're also interested in Firefox apps. The reason why we're interested in signed apps because they have certain security features that we like. And I read that the Firefox OS guys wanted to get rid of the packaged apps and move to like a standardized way to ship those, either via service worker or something else. Is there something you can say about that?
I don't know. I mean, David might want to talk from a Mozilla perspective on it.
There's really not much I can say on that topic because it's not a discussion I was involved in. So.
Well,
I can speak for the Chrome team and the Chrome apps thing. So I understand. I would love to know exactly which features you're missing. I assume that it has something to do with isolation and obviously being able to write to the disk and be able to access the keys that you care about. But that list of features is something that we're trying to burn down. from our perspective. So we've launched a bunch of features in the last year in Chrome that let you build things that work offline, that have a location on your home screen, that have more durable storage. That's one of the things we're adding right now in background synchronization. And so those sorts of features that you need to build a real app-like app on the web platform is sort of our key interest right now, and that's the place where we're going to continue to invest. So I'd love to hear your feature list so that we can get it right.
Well, and so the main feature is actually not like APIs that the Chrome apps have. It's the threat model. So when you have like a versioned application that is signed, you can audit this, and you can say, I installed exactly this version. So when the threat model that is always, if you do client-side encryption, so we do all of our encryption in JavaScript, and it's always said that if you click on a website, you're always reinstalling it. Every time you click on this link, you're installing it. So if you install a Chrome extension or a packaged app, you always have a versioned application. And this has some nice characteristics because from a threat model point of view, you can audit this version, you can install it, and be fairly safe that it's not going to be backdoored by the server, you know?
Yeah, service workers give you some amount of this control. They're basically like an in-browser network proxy that lets you have and cache a particular known chunk of stuff.
So we were just, in fact, talking about this just today. The last thing we talked about.
So everything you're saying is very familiar grounds to me, and I've gone through everything you've said, and I think this is actually a lacking part of the W3C specs. Like, we don't have anything that's addressing this problem. Service workers potentially could, but I think you only let them be cached for 24 hours. Wait, you took that out, or is that? Sorry.
This is a common misunderstanding.
Okay.
Service workers will only respect the cache control headers for checking to see if there's a new version of the application for 24 hours. So you can only be stranded on a bad push for 24 hours, but you can keep that version as long as you want. You can keep the latest version you had for as long. I mean, it would be a terrible experience if you had an offline application and then 24 hours later you didn't happen to be online and it's just sort of went away, right? Like, we would have screwed that up.
How many are familiar with Service Worker or have heard of Service Worker? Okay, so that's most people. Okay, good.
Just as an aside, you mentioned you're implementing PGP. The ITF is spilling up a working group to revise the PGP specs. So as an implementer, you might be interested in that.
Great, thanks. And I think so I have been working with the Firefox OS guys, and I think that the goal has always been to move away from that model of having a Firefox OS specific application install and packaging, and move towards a more webby approach, right? So that's always been the goal, and I think that's something that, again, we have been talking about today. Maybe Tim has more.
Well, I just point out, it sounds to me as though what you're asking for is the ability, for example, for a user to say, I have got PGP 8.6, and so so when when my mom calls me and says, I'm going to send you email as long as you've got your PGP email 8.6 installed and your office says that, then you can say yes. And it's a very well-defined version and installation of it, and it's got a well-defined identity, well-defined version, and a well-defined sort of status. So I think, told you. Yeah, yes, this is what I see. We have. So I've been making the point that we need, for web apps, we need to be able to do that. We need to be able to put things in that state, and because when you do that, then we can give. Then we can give you the right. For example, when you've gone through that, we can give you things like you can do if you're a trusted app, then you can open arbitrary TCP connections. You can be an IMAP client. You can do all kinds of things which you can't really do.
We are an IMAP client.
I think we also have a tension that we play with against this idea of wanting to install and keep a version that is consistent and same, with this other tension of wanting to always be current and up to date. And if you take a traditional app model, you sort of have this problem of, well, you can get it and install it, but then you have to have a way of updating it regularly, and there's some kind of an update cadence. And when you have the web, it's like people don't care; they just go to the site, and it's always the most current thing. Plus, you can do things like flighting new features to subsets of your customers, and like interesting ways of testing like that. So that's something that we think about as well.
Yeah, we also discussed in the last year about packaging on the web within the tag. It first started from a performance point of view, which was proven to be pointless because there are better ways of actually doing performance than sending package resources. But some security input would be pretty welcome.
So one suggestion I'd like to make, what I think is really interesting is the new manifest. And what I've been thinking about how to solve this is to basically add some kind of way to be able to say this application I trust, it's privileged, and this could be done by packaging or signing it. I'm not sure who would sign it or who's the trust anchor there, but I've been thinking about this, and that could also be a chance to say, okay, allow this application to open TCP sockets or IMAP or other advanced things. But
we should talk after.
Yeah,
we should.
I'm sorry. Let's take it to beer.
Yeah.
So we seem to have. Oh, okay.
And he appears.
Someone?
Hello, I'm Bastian. I'm a freelance developer and I do JavaScript and CSS stuff. And lately I've been working a lot with React and I love it. And I was at the ReactConf Europe recently, and there's a lot, like, among the developers, there seems to be a lot of hostility towards the DOM and also especially towards CSS. There was like a lot of people like screaming, yeah, when there was someone, oh, write inline tags. And I'd like to hear, like, so the virtual DOM stuff is something they push very hard, and that's very interesting as an idea, I think. But I also, like, the other angle was the programmability of the CSS. So doing interactive stuff, I would be interested in your high-level view on that. Yeah. So it's a very open question, you know, but.
Yeah, so I can talk about the programmability of CSS, which is basically there isn't any that's worth a damn. There's the CSS object model, and the entire CSS working group hates it. It is an abomination, born spawn of the devil. We are replacing it. We're not trying to fix it. We're just pretending we're doing it like it's a bad movie, and we're going to pretend it never existed and do a good one from scratch. Yeah, so this is actually there's a new task force that started up. It's a joint effort between the TAG and the CSS working group called the Houdini Task Force. So the whole idea is to make CSS extensible, make it programmable, open it all up, basically have a nice object model for the entire CSS stack itself, but in addition, exposing all of the black box magic that CSS has always enveloped. So there's an entire layout engine in there and a layout model of a page that you can't touch. And the only APIs to it are through the DOM, and they're horrible APIs and in the wrong place and the wrong thing. So we're building a whole new API that is the box model. That is just nothing but the layout of the page. So you'll be able to work with that directly. Not only iterate it, but you'll be able to plug into the layout process and create your own boxes and manipulate them as part of the layout flow. You'll be able to plug into the paint process and draw your own contents of your own boxes if you need to. So this is part of the extensible web work to try to explain how the whole platform works and expose all of this to developers. So this is all work that's in progress, and it is finally coming. We've only been asking for it for 20 years or so, but yeah.
When is it shipping?
When it's shipping, I don't know, but we're working on the early versions of the specs. I heard some Chrome may actually be shipping some bits of the Paint API fairly soon.
I can't say when we'll ship them, but we're doing some refactoring internally in the way we do rasterization, and once that's done, custom paint looks like it's a straight shot from where we are, which is going to be huge because the thing that I think we all cringe at is this notion of unsemantic stuff in our DOM, which is like mostly elements that you had to put there to get CSS to do something for you, and then you had to go do backflips to make it actually happen. And so if you could just sort of have a draw callback and paint what you were going to paint, that would probably also reduce quite a lot of the work that we do at style recalc time and layout time, where we've got heavyweight objects that we don't need, and so JavaScript apps feel slow and bloated and bad.
Right.
Or bad.
Right now, if you want to get something on the page, you have to create a DOM node just to create the style, to create the box, then to get something to paint. We want to be able to let you just create a box if you want a box to something participate in layout, or just draw part of a box. Because if you already have a box, you just want to draw something special in there. So we're working on providing all of these hooks. The CSS working group, we really do believe strongly in the separation between style and content, and there is no API that gives you that as part of the web platform yet. So we're fixing that.
So I think one of the things that is going to be interesting about some of these APIs is that they will probably look pretty different from some of the APIs that you're used to seeing, in that you won't have access to the same things. Like some of these APIs will have to run in a very restrictive context where you don't have access to the whole DOM that you can poke at. You have access to a limited set of information that's sort of similar to what implementations have access to. So essentially, it'll be more like working under the constraints that browser implementers have to work on when they're doing new layout code or new paint code, which could be a different experience for web developers. But like, I think, exposing that experience to people who want it is good, and that's the point of doing this.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Charles, and I've been an accessibility guy for a long, long time. And I have a question that's sort of half to you guys and half to you guys about the Houdini stuff. What is the risk that what we create is sort of like another canvas that people start using for painting actual content with no accessibility backing behind it, and no ability to get the content out to people who are not looking at your painted version of the thing? And part of that is, what is the risk of you guys seeing this new ability and saying, yeah, that's how I'm going to paint all my text, right?
I'll give you the quick version. So once upon a time,
Audience's preference.
I'm Jonathan Kingston. So I was just wondering if it could be made more public, because the most I've seen so far is that it's just like snapshots of whiteboards. I don't know if there's.
Are you watching the latest status?
Well, just it would be nice to see what the API looks like publicly, rather than just like some drawings on a whiteboard in some random wiki page somewhere.
I think most of what's there now is some drawings on a whiteboard that people need to turn into a spec. This is part of why Peter isn't telling you when it's going to ship.
Yeah, this is going to be a long process. Unfortunately, this isn't something I can say, oh, we're going to just turn the crank and this will be done in 3 months. This is probably going to take years to get everything we really want out of it, because this is a hard problem. I mean, it's actually fairly straightforward if we were to just take, say, the Gecko implementation and just expose an API to it. But if we did that, then every other browser vendor would basically have to rewrite their engine to work like Gecko, and we'd never be able to write a new browser engine. And we don't want to be living in that world. We already have new engines like Servo that are running threaded and doing things completely differently. We want to leave the door open here. So it also speaks to why David's saying this is going to be a different experience for you to use these APIs, because you're going to get a very narrow API, a little snapshot of some data. You're not going to maybe be able to touch the DOM when you're doing certain things, or you only have a read-only view of certain aspects of it. And it'll keep you from doing bad things that make the browsers, make the browsers do a whole lot of work, and also keeps the browsers from being locked into a particular way of doing things. So we can just kind of expose the edges of things, or give you a snapshot into an instance of when some part of a much larger process is going on without you having to be aware of the entire process and be meshed into that entire process. So the process could change around you and your code would still work. So that question, it becomes a question then of how you do it. Really, there's always good ways of doing things and bad ways of doing things. And like right now, a lot of people do a lot of really bad things architecturally and to the web because they have no better APIs. And I'm sure as these APIs evolve and become available, they will only have a slightly less bad way of doing things in a different bad way, and not the best way of doing something that fits and works for accessibility and whatnot. But the end goal is to get there when it's done, we should be able to do this right, and not break accessibility and not break every other feature when you want to do something special.
Yeah, I guess I would like bolster that, but go a little further, which is that I don't necessarily accept the premise of the question. So from our experience of seeing very large applications built at the million lines of JavaScript scale for going on a decade now at Google, our experience is that people are going to route around a platform that is not expressive enough. And so the onus on a lower level API, which is what the extensible web sort of does provide in trade, is all this extensibility and all this power, and now you have a lot of opportunities to shoot yourself in the foot, right? And that's true, but I think that was going to be true anyway, and denying people that power hasn't worked out as a way of improving the accessibility story, for instance, of the platform, but it also hasn't improved the performance story. It hasn't improved our memory footprint. It hasn't improved our programmability, and it hasn't improved our developer experience. So because there are so many frontiers at which we can improve by providing people power, I think we should be less fearful of the accessibility outcomes.
Hi, Marcus from Tablenautics. We are making web apps in the business intelligence sector. And if I'm understanding right, you say the new API will be very limited. So my biggest fear is I have to maintain code in two worlds. I'm trying to, then I have to maintain or write new code in one world, in the current world, and then I have to do or can do some new stuff using the new API. When I want to change or combine those possibilities, I always have to maintain two different places. And will that be an issue, or can that be an issue, or do you think this won't be one?
I'm sure that'll be an issue to some extent as these features roll out. Chrome will have feature X first, Firefox will have feature Y first, and if you want to write an app that works across all browsers and you want to use these features, yeah, you're going to have to figure out another way of doing it on the other browsers. The goal is that you can write this once for all browsers, but the rollout problem is always going to be there.
I sort of think of it like you're trying to construct a frame on the page, right? A frame for display by the GPU, and you have a series of implicit pieces of the lifetime where we do, you do some DOM work in JavaScript, we yield to you. You generate a DOM, we do some style recalc, we generate some boxes, we do some layout on those boxes, then we paint those boxes, and maybe if you put some new HTML in, we'll start that process again, or if you change some DOM, we'll start that process again, and we'll go back all the way through it until the point where we've got a painted stuff and then it goes out. Those are discrete moments in the lifetime of generating a frame. And today, the only context that you can affect it from is that main thread JavaScript context. What will happen is we'll give you the ability to work in the other threads that are currently cooperating to generate those other portions of that waterfall through the frame generation process, but you'll have to live with that responsibility and in the same constraints that we do when we implement those threads inside the browser. So yes, it will be different. But it'll be different in a good way because the model that the browser is already implicitly presenting to you, which is very muddy from DOM, will become much clearer because you'll be living inside the time slice that you would have otherwise wanted access to, but today only get access to like in weird sort of edge casey, like RAF gives you something at like the end of one of these phases kind of ways. Yeah. Sorry, request animation frame.
So it's more like a shader when it comes to desktop applications?
Shaders run on the GPU. So shaders are programs that are uploaded about quads and textures that the GPU knows how to operate on, and they operate at in a different process entirely. These are probably like different threads. This
from the level of what I can.
Yeah, that's pretty close. Like you'll get a subset. You'll get the box tree that Houdini will hand you, and then you can do box operations, but you can't go and maybe synchronously access the DOM that generated that box.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Jan. I'm just a regular old front-end developer. What I find weird that the web is taking, it started out sharing simple documents among people, and it's evolving over the years towards this kind of VM runtime generic platform kind of thing. And we've seen a lot of similar environments, like there has been Flash, there has been the .NET CLR, there has been Java, which have all tried to kind of get at the same goal, but they they went much faster, and they jumped to the like last step to have the generic VM with a very basic access to the display, etc. Whereas the web has been going much more slowly towards the same thing. But in this development, do you ever think about where we might end up and how, like, not just thinking from where we're currently and how we proceed to the next step, but also coming from the other direction, like where do we want to go and connect the dots, kind of what's the end game for the web?
Is there an end? No, it's a fair question.
I think it's a really good question. It's a really good tag question, and I think sort of from a high level, yeah, we ought all to be worried because declarative web information is solid, persistent, reusable by future generations, and so on, and chunks of code aren't. So web pages that talk to each other, don't flash pages, whatever are typically procedural information as not as useful in lots of different ways. Hence, we have this rule, the principle of least power. If you could use the least powerful language, use the most declarative language you can. So if you can just do it in HTML and CSS, do that. And if you have to add JavaScript, then add little bits. But clearly one of the ways that this can go. One of the ways it can go is that basically when we got to the point where every web page is just a programmable computer, the whole web behaves like a set of programmable computers, and people write a completely new distributed system which is just deployed on the web, but otherwise has got nothing to do with the web and has got completely different properties. But of course, because the web is deploying these things, they can all be, lots of them can be deployed at once, they can all talk to each other, and so on. So there could be all kinds of complexities, all kinds of interesting new systems which might have interesting properties or horrible properties. Another interesting way things can go is that is a bit by bit, you find that, yeah, there are huge amounts of code being used, but they're all the same libraries are being used. And in fact, when you look at the libraries carefully, they're actually being driven by data. So they may be driven by data that's out there on the web. They may be driven by configuration files. And so when somebody creates an app, in fact, what they're doing is they're actually just creating another. There is another declarative language that's been invented, and all of these piles and piles of JavaScript libraries have been used just in order to interpret that language. And suddenly people find that they've congealed on a new declarative language which can be standardized, and we can start the process again, or we can throw out and then having standardized on the declarative form, that can be then optimized. People can compete. The actual JavaScript ceases to become a reference implementation and just becomes one of the competing and then that evolves like web components, of course, a way of sort of getting there earlier by particularly making sort of chunks of a new declarative language which actually fits in within the HTML structure. So yeah, good question.
Yeah, I was going to say web components are sort of a way to sort of join the nice declarative properties that we have today to that sea of JavaScript that we sort of all have in our applications right now. Where today they're two separate worlds. It would be nice if they were sort of layered and joined up together, and that was sort of the impetus of a lot of the thinking behind the Extensible Web Manifesto, which is that browsers contain all this stuff already. It's just that they've arranged in a particularly good way in terms of preserving linkability, indexability, declarative structure of applications in ways that have lots of these sort of side benefits. They're searchable, for instance, and that that configuration of interests and like the ability to hang a name off of any state, right? A URL as a place and a thing. And it doesn't represent the outside of the shell of your application necessarily. It represents the thing you're looking at. Those properties are things that we want to preserve. And so we do think very hard about how to evolve the web compatibly to preserve those properties so that URLs and markup and indexability and linkability all stay at the center while we still excavate and expose all that power that's in there.
I was just going to say, I don't know that there is an end goal. I think that Alex might have coined a term earlier today saying that the web is the interoperable open platform that people can trust, which I kind of like as a slogan. But I think there's always going to be that tension between declarative and imperative, and also the web is always going to continue to evolve. When the web stops evolving, then we'll know that it's been replaced by something, so I'm hoping to see a continued evolution from along that trajectory.
I also think when we started, we were thinking of a transfer of a physical thing to this digital format. Like, we all had paper and printers, and we started with that idea, and then we created a web which was documents, right? Like the documents, one of these primary objects in the DOM. Today, I think we may have named it. We would maybe name it something other than document. We might call it like the app. I think a lot of us think in terms of the web as applications. Going forward, it's more of a universal runtime to me. That's capable. That's so much. It's so much grown beyond its original intentions. And I also wanted to speak a little bit to this cooperative nature that I think has made the web really successful. When Flash and .NET and these things you mentioned, they come on, and they can come on pretty strong and rapidly be developed because they are a cohesive deliverable that is a closed system that you lock into and you work on, and you kind of stick in a certain platform with a certain technology, and it has many advantages. But what's made the web really successful is this cooperation, that we develop it together across different corporate boundaries, across different educational boundaries, and we build it together. And it takes longer, but ultimately it leads to this successful thing that endures beyond the reach of any one single platform.
One last off-the-wall addition to that. The principles of open data are all about you being able to use what I've posted or vice versa, and that unintended angle of me not having any control over what you do with it. That has meant that I spend a lot of my time thinking about the web outside the browser. And sometimes that's just directly sort of app-to-data type API connections. Sometimes that's full-on data to something tangible. We have a lot of instances of art, of physical art made from data on the web, which is very outside the browser. So I think there's something really fun in the ongoing evolution that's already turned up lots of surprises beyond the sort of idea of a place to post and share and link documents. And I really hope that the web will continue to surprise us like that.
I think one of the interesting things about the web as something that people surf around and wander around is the way I think it happens to use in human beings parts of our brain which do navigation. So when it looks like documents with links, and when it looks like paths, then it seems that we have a lot of machinery we can throw at it, and we pick it up, and we remember learn how to do things quite quickly. And I noticed how frustrated I was on a bank website when I was looking at one. I've got a big list. I've got a potential blog about all the things banks should sort out on their websites. But just this little one I noticed was that there was a sort of thing that looked like a pop-up, and which had the account I was looking at, and if you clicked on it, that was the thing which allowed me to change from one account to another. And that's how I got to looking at this account. And when I clicked on it, it put up the other accounts which I could have been looking at, which is very logical. So the pop-up had the other 3 accounts, but it didn't have the one I'm on. But what my brain expects is there's a little wood between worlds. If you're in there's a little thing there's a little place which has got 4 slots, and currently I'm in one. I wanted to move to another one. So to pop up the menu and have the current place not be there just bugs me every time, and makes me have to look at it and think of it instead of going through it. So I think that however sophisticated we get about reprogramming the whole user interface, there's a certain extent we will benefit a lot if we use the navigation stuff in the human brain, because the human brain ain't gonna evolve in time, even plastic though it is. I think it's going to be it'll behoove us well to make apps which have that navigational feel, have a sense of space, have a sense of motion, and going forwards and backwards and things like that. However, whatever technology they're built on in the future.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Oh, do we have any more? In the back.
Hi, my name is Max. I work for Brandwatch, and I think I have a very general question. We web developers for years are used to using libraries, polyfills, frameworks on top of what browsers provide. So we always try to do things more complex and more advanced compared to what we have standardized. And over the years, we get more complex websites, applications. So more things get developed and more things get standardized. So how do you actually decide what should be standardized and what should belong to the library world to polyfill world? Because I've heard many years ago, I've heard proposals, let's just standardize jQuery because it's so popular and very good API. And now people say there's React and there is this virtual DOM thingy, so let's maybe just standardize the whole thing. And another approach would be just to ask React guys which low-level APIs they use a lot and where they need maybe optimization or where there is something they lack to be more performant and improve on that. So how do you decide what belongs to libraries to be developed by third parties and what belongs to standards?
While you were talking, I was thinking about the IndexedDB spec. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. When that spec was being developed, we had come from a place of WebSQL, like a very high-level, simple model for making database connections and requests. And the thought was, what we need to do is get to the very primitive pieces that would allow frameworks and libraries to build on top of to create better ergonomics for connecting to databases and give them just the pieces that they need. And we went after and we thought we delivered something that could do that. And then we waited for the libraries to appear. And they didn't really come. And so I think you're asking a fantastic question. I don't know that we have a very firm answer to that, but we're going to talk about it.
My perspective is that the transmission mechanism from the very fast evolution in libraries. So I worked on libraries before I joined Google. I worked on JavaScript libraries. There's very fast evolution because the code bases are smaller and the responsibilities are lower. You don't have to carry the weight of a stable implementation across all potential developers across the entire world, across the entire web, all at once when you have a library that you're including on just your one website, or you've just made a library that can make assumptions or put restrictions on the person who's including it in their page. So there are sort of these different scales of kind of responsibility that sort of correlate to what you would imagine would happen with like a good idea starting small, starting in a library, starting in a one-off project, and then getting transmitted as it gained momentum. What happens today frequently, though, is that there's a lot of momentum that happens inside of libraries. Like libraries follow each other very quickly with good ideas. You see tons and tons of new ideas transmitting themselves through the library ecosystem very fast today. But what you don't see is any connection from that endpoint to what happens in, say, DOM. And so there's a question about why is that true? Why is DOM still so broken? Why is HTML still so broken? And I usually lay the blame at the foot of the browser vendors who have done a poor job of doing science about the web. We don't study the web today. You hear people talking about doing research about the web, and that usually is about some parallel, pure data thing, which is interesting and I'm sure fascinating. But I think the actual web is worth study. And so I'm personally trying to hire someone to do science about the web. So if you happen to live in San Francisco and want to do science about the web, come talk to me. But the corpuses that we've had access to in general have been pretty poor. One of the things we started to do in browsers recently is for users who opt in to crash reporting and for statistics reporting. By the way, you should please do that if you can. We can collect anonymized user data about feature usage. And that has allowed us to shine a very bright light both onto what isn't being used and we can finally remove, which is liberating, because we felt we were always going to touch some electrified wall every time we tried to remove something. But also looking at what people are using very heavily and then go and investigate that deeper. But that's only one aspect of the question of creating an observatory about what the web actually does and what is important and what should happen. Our proxy for that today, our best guess, is to go talk to library maintainers, to framework authors, because they have a sort of a longer term and broader view than potentially someone who's building a single website, and that's very productive, and has been our shortcut so far.
And of course, remember that you don't have to have just one of everything. Originally there was a concern about choosing which of CSS and XSL should be the style sheet language. Having two, in fact, they ended up turning into completely different languages. And IMAP and POP, I don't know whether there was a battle back in there about which was better, IMAP or POP, but in fact, having two stacks. In fact, if we had two TCPs, it's not a lot of code. So as long as basically each layer you only have two and you don't have 16. It's not ridiculous code being relatively small when compiled to have more than one answer and have them competing.
I think something that Tim said earlier as well is relevant, which is if you can find the patterns that lead back to a developer model that is easy to use and more of perhaps a declarative model, then you lower this barrier of entry for the general populace. So as we adopt this extensible web manifesto, what we want to do is allow you web developers to experiment not just with JavaScript APIs, but to allow you to build the new set of elements and basic building blocks that then could be turned into standards based on their acceptance and popularity. I think the picture element was one that kind of went through this process and developed, and now we have this new element born of that process. And I think there's a lot more potential for that stuff, but right now the standards aren't focusing on adopting those. We're still working out getting the low-level access that you need to start experimenting.
Yeah, and I'd add that that's a very new thing. It's very recently we had a couple of really smart people sitting in a room and figuring out, I think it needs to be this, and very often they got it wrong. And that we have a couple of really drastic examples of that, like AppCache, and yeah, and so this is a chance to try and get a broader view of what the web needs to evolve. I kind of, in a way, it's a pendulum. 10 years ago, we had HTML being developed in a really drastically different way, and now the pendulum has swung the other way, where we have this very, the extensible web approach, where it's very flexible, very developer-driven, very atomized. It's very broad. You don't have just a few people who have the vision for where the web is going to be. It's crowdsourced effectively. I think, as Tim was talking about earlier, the hope is that the pendulum will swing back and will coalesce around the next generation of maybe declarative markup. Or at least we hope that'll happen. I hope that'll happen.
Okay, thank you very much.
So you guys mentioned you were talking about security today, so maybe this is a good time to ask this question. But do you have a consensus on the future of
name?
Oh, sorry, my name is Eric. Excuse me, I'm a web developer here in Berlin. And I'm curious if you guys have a consensus on the future of DNS, because this is sort of like notoriously one of the weakest links in web. I mean, I've looked at things like OKTurtles and like using the blockchain to resolve DNS entries, but this seems like a really important thing that actually affects lives. Like the box model has never threatened anyone's life, in Nigeria. But things like DNS and like actually resolving correct, safe addresses seems very important, and I'm not sure if you guys are coming to a consensus on that yet or not.
So
Consensus?
yeah, it's OK Turtles and all the blockchain-based stuff is absolutely fascinating, and I love it. I'm really happy to see a few newer versions of that are more usable and deployable than the previous ones. But talking to people, I think there's a lot of concern still about scalability. Yeah. Taking that to an internet scale is, the blockchain does have some limitations. And it also scares the living Jesus out of ICANN for some strange reason. Excuse me.
I can imagine.
We also have DNSSEC, and kind of the unofficial consensus on that in the web world is that it's very interesting and it's nice, but it's not terribly deployable on the web today because there are so many middle boxes that do fun things to DNS, and also because we have people say, oh well, let's move to DNSSEC and get away from the CA system for the root of trust, and yeah, you're doing that, but you're changing to a different system of trust that has some maybe undesirable properties as well. So maybe that's not the right solution either. There's Dane, where you're making assertions based on DNSSEC, and you can do things like carry Dane assertion in TLS, but that doesn't seem to be catching on either. Yeah. In an HTTPS everywhere world, you don't, DNS is still a point of failure, but you're not relying upon it to identify the site. You can rely on the certificate. Yes, you're relying on the CA system there, yeah. But you do have that second level of verification. Yeah, I'd love to chase up more of the blockchain-based stuff and have something more distributed. We're just now, there's the last call going out to register.onion, which is fantastic, and there's some folks here in Berlin actually pushing some other truly distributed naming routes as well in the DNS, which is great.
Also, this is just a quick question for the Mozilla guy, but is it true that Firefox might ship with an actual Tor implementation at some point? I mean, I know Brendan Eich eventually one time tweeted about it, but I don't know if that was facetious or not. Yeah. Okay, just curious.
Can I go back to the other DNS question? Because obviously that's always been the Achilles heel of the web, has been DNS, because the whole thing is decentralized apart from DNS, which is centralized. And the addition of IP addresses. So there's two pieces, right? There's the technological piece and the social piece. So, and there are separate issues there. So if somebody comes along and designs a more solid, less hackable DNS, even if they could design one and they could deploy it, then that doesn't necessarily mean that you solve the social problem. You have to. Yes, interesting. It's interesting to look at different technical solutions. For example, you could imagine replacing DNSNet records with signed JSON pages on on access to HTTP. I mean, that would be really easy. You could probably write it in an afternoon, code it in an afternoon. And so with web cryptos for the signature and stuff. So that deploying, just getting a whole bunch of IP data out there into a tree to emulate the same with the same social system isn't rocket science. That might be easier to deploy than trying to change. You'd probably want to use the web rather than changing the DNS routers gadgets out there. But and then there's a social side where at the moment the whole domain name system has been run by a bunch of industries which have made a lot of money out of it, to a large extent, to the disadvantages of people who want, if you want entrepreneurs who just want to start a new company, you want to start a new app, and suddenly you find that for some reason there's some huge multi-billion-dollar company which happens to own all the English language .com names, because that's the way the world is. That is the way, and meanwhile, you have people having to pay money for ridiculous random .x domain, top-level domains for X being more or less anything. So we've got a big social system over there. In both, so it's worth thinking about what you prefer, both for separately. In a way, for the technical system and the social system, in a way, they're separate problems. And in both cases, of course, when you think about how you would like. You should, I think, be, when it comes to the social system, you should really think out of the box. Don't assume you have to move incrementally from where you are now. Think about and thinking about blockchain, of course, makes people think out of the box, makes think about that's decentralized. But if there's going to be a trust model, if there's going to be a reason for you trusting the fact that your browser is in the right place, what is that trust model? You can think up a new one. When you think up a new technology, or you think up a new social trust arrangement, in each case, then you have to figure out how to get there. But I think that was the problem when, to a certain extent, with DNS stack, they didn't figure out that it would actually get deployed. So for a lot of the technologies we've been talking about today, like HTTPS, it's not a question just defining and praising it. It's a question of figuring out how to get there like a chess game. So that, and for a new DNS, but that will be. But I'd encourage people to very much think about it. Otherwise, the temptations. We used to be able to say not our lair, but actually, we can't in practice.
And on a related note, I'm seeing a lot more interest in discussion of, the analogy at the HTTP layer. Do we need a truly distributed form of HTTP where it isn't just client server, it's peer-to-peer or off the network, or having some sort of the content-based networking, that sort of stuff. I imagine we're going to see more discussion of that in the next year or so. So that's interesting as well.
Mike West, also on the Chrome team. As we evolve towards more and more native app capabilities, how do we avoid evolving the same security issues that we see in native applications?
I have pet theories, which you've heard before, but for the record, a couple of important properties of the web, I think, are worth maintaining. A lot of what the tag does is try to make sure that new things that come down the pike maintain the desirable properties that we want to keep in the web and don't exacerbate the previous mistakes. So it sort of requires a sense of taste. In this case, user consent for things that you didn't expect the web to be able to do is an important property. We have seen this for geolocation. We've seen this for camera and mic access. Requesting permissions in context, so for instance with a new push notification thing, we're never going to grant new stuff by default. Users have to make an affirmative choice to get these new capabilities in some way that is hopefully meaningful to them. The other side of it is that we need to make sure that the APIs that we design work that way, that they all have the ability to have an asynchronous request moment, so that when someone requests this new permission, we can insert that sort of specific UI that we would like to communicate to the user about whether or not this is allowed to happen, and preserve the implicit API design that everybody has for these capabilities, which is that developers have to think about the answer of no, which is to say that the API doesn't just sort of automatically grant it to you. You have to be able to handle the failure of not getting the permission handed back to you. And so those are important properties that we're sort of drilling all the way through the process when new permissions come to the tag. The new permissions API bakes a lot of these principles in, and I think that that's an important bulwark to doing it. The other side of it is that, as you know, and as you've been instrumental in ensuring happens, we're attempting to make sure that new capabilities that are powerful don't ever get given to parties that you couldn't authenticate, right? So functionally what that means is that new capabilities are reserved to TLS, new powerful capabilities, and there's a draft called the powerful features.
Secure context.
Secure context, I'm sorry. But this draft basically says, look, if you're going to do something new and it's going to have potentially a privacy risk, or the user wouldn't be expecting the browser to be able to do that by default, then that feature is going to have to be guarded to only work over TLS and potentially with user consent.
Hi, my name is Nate. I'm a .NET developer in Berlin. I had a question about the overall standardization process and where a lot of the input is coming from besides frameworks and things like that. We've got representatives from a lot of big American companies here and a German company as well. And what I was wondering is, recently has there been more input from large companies that we might not have been hearing from in the past in Asia? Are they pushing certain standards like Baidu or Alibaba or companies like that?
I will delegate the Asian part of the question to somebody else because I haven't run into them in my working groups, but I can certainly talk about the process. The working groups are generally made up of W3C members, so there are companies who've paid to be a part of the W3C. We do then all of the working group activities in the open so that we can be as transparent as possible. That process is generally pretty wide-ranging, but a lot of it depends on who's in the working group, so literally it becomes a function of who's in the room. Specs then get drafted, and then there's a series of public consultations where you have to put the spec out for public review. You get a lot of comments back. You have to address each of the comments and demonstrate that you've paid attention to each one and you've resolved it to the commenter's satisfaction. Then when the text is relatively stable, you have to demonstrate that there's two implementations of each of the features in the spec. So again, as I was saying earlier, that's our way as W3C of making sure that this isn't something that just makes sense on paper, that this is actually happening out in the real world. I think in my experience, the fact that the W3C community is growing, the fact that both membership and the sort of broader community is growing, and the fact that we are getting better and better about talking about what we're up to and our reach is growing means that we're getting input from a lot more places. I'm certainly seeing much more attention on our specs now in data on the web than we were getting in government linked data a few years ago, and some of the discussions are actually on the same topics or very similar topics. So yes, we're trying hard to be as wide open as possible. Having said that, I'm not sure we ever get as many of the right people in the conversation as possible. So we desperately need more input, and we need more ways to get that input. So if you have any thoughts on that, it would be useful too.
One of you.
I just think it's important to note that in addition to people who work for W3C member companies, there are also many invited experts. Both you and I are actually invited experts into the tag. And also we have the community group process, which can be participated in, and community groups can be started by anybody in the community, even people who are not invited experts or affiliated with W3C member companies, and that was part of the whole point of spinning up the community group process so that we could have a more inclusive web standards community, beyond just the kind of member companies that fund the work.
Just one thing, you were talking about participation from Asian countries, and you can extend it to participation from non-English speakers. Yes. Being a non-English speaker, I can talk about that. So yeah, it's also a matter of educating people in being able to express what their feedback in English, and not to be shy about that. And it really depends on culture. So there's part of that, but it's improving. For example, in the WebApps working group, we get more and more involvement from Asian countries, either directly or through help on the testing front, because testing is very important. So it's happening slowly, but it's happening.
And there are local things. So the Chinese host is pretty strong and has Chinese local events, which we know, which we don't see about. Hear about them indirectly, and hopefully on a good day, sort of the input from those events when they talk about the future of the web connects to all the things we have over here to a certain extent. There are discussions in each country in each local language, and we have offices in, of course, in different countries at the smaller level, but in general, trying to get I remember that soon after the Chinese host became a host site, and we had somebody said, let's have a panel with all 5 browser vendors, and somebody said, actually, you mean all 10 browser vendors. Yeah, it's very easy to the temptation to exist within your own language. It's hard work to get to work outside your own language. It's And it's also hard work to work outside your own time zone. I'm looking at Mark, who's constantly traveling from Australia. So that's, it's actually real. It's pain to be constantly. So to actually get, in a way, in principle, you could ask people to spend their time flying around the world and make sure they incorporate just as many people from every continent. But that's a real mean thing to ask them. So in some ways, it's better to delegate and let Japanese and Chinese groups, like Japanese, of course, were very early into mobile. So there were some things which took off there. So to let let European, American, Chinese, and Japanese groups sort of to specialize in things that are of particular interest to that local industry.
And you do see, for example, in HTTP2, we had a very heavy Japanese involvement. We had a lot of great input from those guys, and they gave us implementations as well as tests, as well as feedback. Samsung from South Korea is pretty heavily involved in a lot of stuff. Hitachi has been involved in stuff in the past. I do see folks like Huawei is very involved in the lower networking level specs a lot. Baidu, I see poking around once in a while in certain things. They throw proposals over the wall. Culturally, the engagement model is a little bit different, and that's sometimes difficult. Often, the bigger companies will hire an American to represent them because they understand the culture a bit better, and they can, frankly, sometimes you get working groups, maybe in the ITF more the W3C, that are very kind of West Coast U.S. centric in terms of an interaction model and how people relate to each other, and that can be really hard to deal with. But I think there's more awareness of that now than there was even 5 years ago.
I think one other piece there, and that's been a big issue in CSS, is that a bunch of the things in CSS are actually to some degree language specific or writing system specific, and one of the things, and the focus of CSS as a standard was very Western focused in the CSS1 and CSS2. And a number of years ago, a group of designers and publishers in Japan got together and had a series of meetings in Japanese to write a document to describe to the rest of the world what good Japanese design and typography was. And then they finished it and they translated it into English and gave it to us to tell us what they needed, essentially. And this process has now been repeated with some other groups that are a few years further behind in the process, but that has helped lead to a number of things being added to CSS that are important if you're writing Japanese, and people writing Western languages don't care.
And I'll just add that we've been talking so far about the technical aspects or the impact on technical specs in terms of global participation. The other is that we have to engineer a web for the entire world. It is a World Wide Web. And when we talk about things like pervasive monitoring or making everything encrypted or the privacy aspects of the web, that means different things in different parts of the world. And we have to be very careful about rationalizing that. Wow, that's a cool ring. And we do spend some time talking about that in the tag as well.
Hi, my name is Amin. I'm a designer. And I was just playing around with CSS level 4 variables declaration. And I was wondering, because something I really like about CSS, it's a simplicity. But in my opinion, how variables are declared in CSS4, it's definitely not simple. And I was wondering what were the reasons behind it. Just a curiosity, not really a question. Thank you.
Okay, so two things. First of all, there's no such thing as CSS4 or CSS3. No, there's no such thing as level 4 CSS. There are individual modules which level independently. So just something, a little pet peeve.
Why does that matter?
Why does that matter? It doesn't matter at all, actually. It doesn't matter to anybody except for a few other people. CSS variables are actually not variables. That's probably where the confusion comes from. Hence the name. Yes. People have been asking for them for years and years and years, and it's so simple to write a preprocessor or some simple macro substitution, variable substitution, and it was rejected every single time. it's something you can do in a preprocessor very easily. It's just not something that was considered to be belonging as part of the CSS language. So what we have is actually CSS custom properties. So it's the ability to create something that looks like a CSS property, acts like a CSS property, participates in the cascade like a CSS property does. It's not a variable, it's not a substitution within your style sheet itself. So there's a different mental model than maybe what you're expecting. So that's probably why it acts and feels a little bit weird to you, because if you're expecting variables, you're not getting that. You're getting something that plays nice with the rest of CSS, and that was done very much on purpose. Like I said, we rejected variables I don't know how many times throughout the years. When the idea of custom properties came along, everybody said, that feels like CSS, that's a CSS thing, yes, that should be part of CSS. And it gives you the power and expressibility of what you can do with variables, but it also gives you a whole lot more. So you can through script modify the value of a custom property, and and maybe it doesn't change everywhere, and that's a good thing because it's participating in the cascade, and other things are overriding that property where they need to. So that's the intent. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, so hi, I'm Lucy. I'm a student and working over there at Wikidata. And well, you said you concern yourself as well with open data. And I was wondering, so I got into reading about RDF, Turtle, and Sparkle and so on. And I was wondering, because that's usually used in a very scientific environment, if you think that's actually something that can be used in the real world, and if and because it would be, or if it's if we're going to get at the point where we can relate all this open data we get from I don't know, different sources.
The short answer is that there are different use cases and different tools for different situations. Yeah. I do very much think that RDF has a real-world useful application. The use case that got me into it way back when was in the UK. The government data is divided geographically by a bunch of different regions. Sometimes it's the sort of northeast and northwest geographic regions. Sometimes it's the region of a county. Sometimes it's a city. Sometimes it's the area that a police group cover. Sometimes it's the area that belong to a specific school. And there's no correlation between these various regions. They're just overlapping data structures on top of one underlying geography, one underlying map. And the only way to start to make sense of the relationship between those various data sets, or between a point in those various data sets, which that point participates in a particular school region, a particular hospital region, a particular local government region, et cetera, was to use RDF to be able to create relationships between school to hospital with that point being in the middle. So I very much think that RDF is much, much easier for certain use cases, but particularly Sparkle is pretty heavyweight and pretty processor intensive. So if you don't need the full graph and you don't need the ability to query it, then it may not be the right tool for what you're up to.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, well, because we started trying to implement the Wikidata's data into RDF, and querying is with Sparkle, and we exactly have the same problems, that it's just too much data. And yeah.
If you're putting into it really depends on if you want to scale, then you have to look at the different triple stores, because really and quad stores and things out there, because it's very easy to start with some little sort of play. A lot of people started with something like Jenna or something, which is in all the tutorials, but actually which doesn't scale at all. Yeah. So you should go out there on the list and talk to get a serious triple store if you want to do a lot of data. It may be that the particular sorts of queries you're doing, it's better to just throw the stuff in a relational database, but that's fine. So RDF, yeah. Oh, by the way, always use Turtle. Never use RDF XML. Yeah, right, yeah, you know that, right? Yeah. There's some things which it does very nicely that you can just I find in writing data rules, conversion rules, and things when you're tying things together like lots. When you have data information which is of various different shapes, and where the shapes keep changing, where you don't want to have any sort of defining schema, but you want to, the fact that you can just take two turtle files, merge them together into one turtle file, whatever they are, is, that you can't do that with anything else. So there's some things where it's just very nice, and once you've got drunk the sort of RDF Kool-Aid and you've got your favorite RDF API, then you might get kind of stuck doing that. But what you shouldn't do is expect it to be the magic bullet for doing your integration. If you do everything in Wikidata, you have your own ontologies, and then suddenly you want to merge with stuff from Freebase or something, then there's no free lunch.
Yeah.
But some of that you'll be able to use the tools to do it, but you'll also have to go to the human work of arguing over which, whether these two things mean the same thing. That, well, no matter what technology you do, finding out whether people really meant the same thing is always going to be, an expensive thing.
Okay, make a separate comment. I mean, I think one of the things you asked about was about data in the real world. I've been doing some work with the Open Data Institute in the UK, and helping them with their startup program, and the whole idea behind that is to incubate companies, startups, that really have open data at the heart of their business model. And I think that's extremely interesting and exciting, because it gets beyond this idea of open data as a kind of research project, or open data as something that's relevant only to governments or NGOs, but into understanding the commercial value of open data. And I've started to think about open data in the same way as open source when it comes to its value to the enterprise and to commercial, the commercial side of things as well. So I think there's a revolution going on in that space right now.
Minor point. Schema.org is a series of schemas which Google does consume today at scale. We are using schema.org markup for lots and lots and lots of things. We understand a lot of it, not all of it yet, but we're getting better. And so there is, as a result, quite a lot of schema.org markup in the world that you can use to feed your pipeline.
Oh, I should
something like over a third of all web pages out there, where somebody quoted, actually have some schema.org compatible data. So that, because if you have your product, Google will recognize it as a product. If in your page about your product you put RDFA, for example, describing it as a product, then that will actually mean that it's understood as a thing, which will go in, which I don't know what Google then does useful things and helps people buy your product. So the incentives for people to actually put data into their page on the web is pretty large.
And there are other formats that people use for data, of course, such as CSV, and there's this new CSV on the web spec that the tag have been CSV, yes, have been feeding back into. So that's definitely moving up. Yes, CSV is coming back. Okay.
Hello, my name is Herbert. I'm a front-end developer and tech journalist. And I've got a question about extensible web. I played a bit around with it and made myself familiar with the technological basis. And to my field, this seems to be like a disruptive technology, like some completely new level of the web platform. But please tell me if I'm wrong. But what I still, having said that, what I still don't quite get is the vision, how the web will look like when it's extensible. Will it be something like, okay, the W3C is giving up with all the standard stuff, they're giving ourselves the tools to make our own stuff, or is it like everything is going into the libraries, or will it rather be something like, okay, you can build your own elements and please do so? I'm still not quite sure how it all will come together.
That's a great question. I have a particular thing in mind. I don't know if it's going to work out. it's informed by our experience in trying to build large-scale JavaScript libraries and doing it over and over and over and over again. And sort of those vocabularies that we built that Tim was alluding to earlier, where people build their JavaScript and they build their own declarative thing on top of their JavaScript thing because they've evolved far enough to have a component framework. And then, look, you can make a declarative version of that, which will get instantiated when you parse that element. That gets you back to that nice declarative use. And creating the connection between that low-level primitive stuff and that high-level declarative stuff, I hope will seed language, right? We evolve our languages, at least in English and most other languages derived in the same tradition, through slang, right? Through introduction of new words that start in a small community and then they grow in use, they gain momentum, and then they eventually sort of, at least in English, get written down in the Oxford English Dictionary, right? They're not invented and then broadcast, like blargity-blarg is a new word and it means this, and then you don't expect everyone to understand it. And instead it comes through use, and as a result it acquires meaning. And so we've had this broken transmission mechanism where everyone is building their new semantics. They're building their new UI component, which means something to a user, and it means something to a developer, and it means something to everybody but the standards and the browser, which means that we're sort of letting you down. So my hope is that extensibility is the basis on which we can improve the rate of iteration and improve the rate of evolution, where standards processes get out of the business of trying to invent the future and get much better at being discerning about writing down what the future already has been very recently. That's the goal. And that requires a much larger population of people who are inventing and iterating in public very quickly in ways that we can understand and ways that we can see. We can use the crawler, the Google bot, and big queries to go understand what new elements and what new tags people are putting in the world. We can instrument the browser to understand what new semantics people are using with ARIA and schema.org to try to understand which semantics are popular and deserve to be in the browser to answer somebody else's question belatedly. So that's the hope, right, is that extensibility begets, to the extent that it creates connections between low level and high level, it begets a better evolutionary process. It's not one endpoint in one place or the other.
Yeah, it's really a recognition that standards are really good at commodification, at consolidating what's already out there, and they're not as good often at innovation, or it's sometimes exceptional when innovation works in standards. And there's a lot of literature out there about that. But it's strange because you talk to people a lot and they're like, oh, well, I've got something new and I want it to get adoption, so I'll standardizing it, and that'll make everybody use it. And that's not really how it works, usually.
So I think another thing that I could see changing in the future with a more extensible web is how things evolve from being in libraries to being in the browser. Like right now, when we write web standards and take something that people have been using out on the web as part of a library or something and take that concept into the browsers, it often means rewriting it at a different layer in the architecture, like taking something that was written in JavaScript and writing it in C++, writing it in a different layer, and maybe for some of the things that people are doing in libraries in JavaScript, writing it in JavaScript is actually the right way architecturally to do it, and better than writing it at a lower level. In that, Travis says that it's safer, and also just that when you're designing a large software system, you want it to be split up into pieces that can be understood. And having different layers that do different things helps do that. So, like, I could imagine in the future where standardizing something might not mean we're going to take this and write it into C++ code in the browser. It might mean we're going to standardize this piece of JavaScript or component or something and agree that all the browsers are going to ship that as part of a standard library for the web.
So why would it have to be C++? If C++ is so dangerous, why is the browser still being written in C++ then? Why isn't it?
That's a good question. One reason is that it takes an awfully long time to rewrite a browser. Mozilla has a project to write a browser that's not in C++. It's a long-term project, and we'll see where it is in 2 years. We'll see how far the web has moved in those 2 years. But being able to write more, like being able to ship more of the browser in the technologies that the web is built on could be useful and could help us move faster.
Jonathan Kingston again. IndexedDB and custom properties have been mentioned. How is the tag going to roll that out into browsers that may or may not want to implement them because they don't see that developers are interested, but library writers may be?
The tag doesn't roll out.
Well, promote the rollout of, and
the tag is an advocacy organization about a sense of taste and how we should do things in design. I don't know that it is an advocacy organization for specific features, which makes it harder.
Apart from promises.
Apart from promises, yeah, of course. My fault. I think the way I think about this is that browser vendors, the people who ship bits to end users, have power. Developers and users have legitimacy. They are the constituency that we serve. And they give standards bodies authority to curtail the power of browser vendors, right? They say, okay, you browser people and framework people, go get in a room and fight it out and let us know when it's done, right? But it has to be legitimate, right? It has to be something that we want. And so to get that done requires everyone to be talking. It requires everyone to be working together to try to figure out some way of splitting up and divvying and blessing a particular thing. But that's influenced by the outside world. That's influenced by what happens in the marketplace. It's influenced by what you choose to build and what you choose to use. So AppCache got replaced because no one used it functionally, right? We were lucky that we were able to replace it because no one too large decided to use it too much. And so sometimes we get another crack at the apple. But the real important part here is that we start building things that are better to start from. Like IndexedDB, I don't know if you've tried to use it, but it does feel a little bit user hostile. Like it's a little tough. So a couple of more turns of the crank on the IndexedDB design might have improved its usability to the point where it wouldn't be such an oddity in the real world. And I think that's a place where we can help.
Can I maybe jump in? I had a question, I had a backup question in case you had no questions, so that's going to be my question. Because it pertains to my particular story with IndexedDB. I'm one of the people who started the No SQL in HTML campaign, which made sure that we don't get a standardized SQL in the web standards. I wasn't actually involved with any of the standard stuff, that's why you didn't see me there, but I got all the people shouting at you. I helped that. So that's good. And then the IndexedDB spec was written, and technically, I could I'm one of the developers for CouchDB database. It's a distributed database on the server side. I know that stuff, but consider a database in the context of the web platform. I couldn't criticize it. I couldn't. I didn't feel empowered to participate in that particular discussion, even though I would have yelled at you for stupid APIs, or that spec, not you personally, that API. But turning that around, you all have years of experience, some of you have decades of experience in this world. You know all the acronyms, you know all the players, you know all the politics, you know all the different mailing lists and forms and everything. And here are a bunch of web developers. No offense. I'm on your side. Here are a bunch of web developers. Some of us have been doing this for a long time. Some of us are just starting out. But you want to have a conversation with us, how? Where do we start? Where do we practically start? How do you how?
Well, just to start off, I think that there's been for a number of years now a realization that was broken. I think app cache is one good example of what happens when you have standardization in a vacuum. I think that there are many mechanisms now that we're trying out and that we're to engage a wider community. First of all, the TAG and many other working groups now are migrating their work to GitHub, where it's more visible to a lot of developers. So it's since that's a tool that has a kind of network effect. So we're W3C TAG on GitHub, for instance, and although it's a little bit chaotic, you can see what we're working on, and you can, anybody can go in and comment on what we're working on, or in that way. But we've also got tools like Specification, which is actually moving to, what is it moving to? It's moving under web platform. Discourse.webplatform.org, right? And the idea of that is it's a discourse, a single discourse instance where conversations can happen that really impact the shape of the standardization process. Or people can go in and register a new topic or a new idea, and it can gain traction. We can have conversations off of that topic, and it can lead into the creation of a community group, the creation of a new work item within a working group. It can influence the dialogue in a way that hopefully gets us away from this idea that you have to know all the acronyms. It's discuss.webplatform.org. Sorry, discuss.webplatform.org, not disgust.webplatform.org, but discuss.webplatform.org.
That's an alias, though.
Yes, it could be. After today, it will be. But yeah, my sense is that we're moving in the right direction there, and we just need to make these mechanisms more widely available and promote the idea. I think that anybody, especially people who are working on real web applications with real users and have real use cases, and are probably probably some of the most valuable input that can ever come into the standardization process. And we need to encourage more of it and more of a cycle there.
So how do you think? What do you think we should do? What do you think the TAG should do to make this communication work better? Any ideas?
Or working groups in general.
Or working, yeah, I suppose.
While you think about that, maybe you brushed on the aspect of making the inroads into the W3C and the standards groups easier from I know where to find this and I can contribute. Do you have plans for making, I couldn't talk about accessibility things in IndexedDB, but I think I'm now fairly caught up on the rest of the web platform. It took me 5 years, right? So I still feel even if I find your GitHub, I feel inadequate to discuss with you with the other experts in the groups, because I just don't know all that stuff. And I don't have a good answer for that. But do you consider this, or are you saying, okay, you need to be an expert to be here?
This is why safe spaces matter. This is why safe spaces matter. Small conversations, not big, open, loud conversations in mailing. Everyone knows here that I rail against mailing lists as a mechanism, because if the medium is the message, then mailing lists create the message that you're not wanted and you're not worthy. Right. That is the default mode of a long-lived mailing list, is to tell you to fuck off. And that is a bug in our tools and in our culture, and it creates a pernicious effect where the people who have the most time to burn and not necessarily the most patience or kindness or empathy or interest can dominate the conversation in bad ways. So tools like Discourse are great. GitHub has been really great at helping us create smaller conversations among people who are really passionately interested, where you don't have to pretend like you know everything to get started, because nobody does and nobody can, and sort of approaching that process with empathy. It does require now a new set of ways of trying to navigate that exploding constellation of new small things. I'm hoping that there's a new sort of incubator community group where new ideas can sort of go to get started, and it'll be one place to look for new stuff that's getting started. I'm hoping to move, at least from the Chrome team's perspective, all new interesting stuff to that location, because that's a place with low overhead. It can be a couple of little GitHub repos here and there that get started among a small community, and they can grow from there. And they can start out in a small safe space where they don't have some massive mailing list looking at them like they did something wrong all the time. So I think that's a key.
Remember, there's the flip side of that, though. When a few Chrome people get together, then there'll probably be people who know each other pretty well. And while it may be safe space for you, it might look pretty intimidating to somebody who's not one of the Chrome dudes.
So the explicit goal here is, of course, not to create an insular community. We already have internal communication tools at Google. We can do NIH on our own, thanks. It's instead to create a place where people who, like on our team, they have the opposite fear. They don't know what people want, and they don't know how to go find them. And so part of our job is to be matchmaker at some level, like my specific role, and then our job on the tag is to go help people find each other and say, well, you sound interested in this. You know, you are looking to implement something like that. Here are people who I know are interested in the same things. You should go off and talk, but don't do it out in the place where you're going to get stomped on. And that constellation of stuff together, like interested developers who are willing to invest time with people who can actually change the implementations, that's what yields a new good idea as opposed to a new idea.
Right. And so the onus is upon us, really, as the standards community, to be welcoming and to create those safe spaces. I can think of a couple of instances where a standards insider has gone and put a wall up to external people, and I think we have to have a zero tolerance approach to that. It's not acceptable. Sorry?
Tear down that wall.
Yes. Thank you so much.
It's also attitude that somebody introduced themselves earlier. I'm just a front-end developer. I was going to make them stop. I think they've left. So I would and just practice. I'm a front-end developer without the just.
Yes, please.
There's no such thing as just.
I also think that you know, from observing this for a long time, people who do standards for a long period of time tend to get defensive because they're asked the same question in slightly different ways a number of times. But to me, that's just an example that you need to explain yourself better. We need to create better materials for the community in terms of explaining why it's not simple to secure the web, or why HTTP works a certain way, or whatever. We need more facts and more educational materials so people understand why we make the decisions we do. One other thing I wanted to mention is that there's also a strong effort in the W3C to test the web and to make it test-driven. All the specs, there's a test the web forward effort. So if you want to contribute but you're not quite sure, you're not quite confident about doing it, one way you can do it is to write a test case, because web developers tend to be more familiar with that. And so that's a great way to dip your toes in.
It's testthewebforward.org.
Yeah. Good way to ask the question. Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Why doesn't this test work? Or yeah.
What should happen in this case?
No talking without mic.
Writing test cases is actually a good way of asking a question too. If the question is, what would happen if I were to make this combination of CSS, then just write it as a test case if the spec doesn't make it clear.
All right, so before I get to you two, so we're having more inroads into the W3C, you're changing the culture, creating safe spaces, more communication can happen there. I have one more angle to throw at you to be before I'm satisfied with your answers. I'm a small business owner. A lot of people here are freelancers. They have no time to participate. Is that an angle that you're interested in, or are you thinking about? Is there like a Google Summer of Code type of thing, a Google Summer of Standards work, whatever? And that's for students, so I couldn't do it anymore, and I wouldn't want to. But like, how can I get time free to like fix IndexedDB, which I really, really want to?
This is a big issue on my mind because I'm an invited expert in all my W3C work. I do it myself. I do it pro bono because the work that I do that's paid doesn't cross over into something where someone who is paying me will pay me to do this kind of work. So I'm in a position where that's a life choice that I've made, and it makes sense for me, and I feel really lucky that I can do that. But I totally understand, and it doesn't make sense that that some organizations are happy to pay and some are not. I mean, I understand how we got to where we are, but it's frustrating. It's also frustrating that the business of writing standards and developing standards is time-consuming. It's really hard to jump into one paragraph of a spec and drop in a few comments and then disappear again. You need to read the whole thing. You need to understand where it's coming from. You need to read the use cases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, if you drop in comments, there's follow-up to your comments, and you've got to participate in that, or not, but then you don't get any closure. It's really hard. I don't have any solutions for you apart from sympathy and empathy. I would love to find a way to make it easier, and I would love to find a way beyond just the automated stuff that Alex is talking about, where we can basically crawl sites and do censuses and collect data about what's going on out there. That's not the same as actually talking to people and getting input on what's being created. So it'd be great if we could find a better way to do that.
I have one hopeful example, which is the jQuery Foundation has done a very good job of helping to cover travel and costs for some of the folks who show up at TC39 specifically to participate in JavaScript standardization. I think part of the answer is organize yourselves. Like, if it's bad, you can have a voice. The legal structures that are in place do tend to favor corporate structures, but you can create your own corporation. And that can be, a nonprofit organization or a public benefit corporation of some variety. And you have foundations in the open source side. You can use them to help both fund and organize resources to help make some of this stuff work. I mean, I would love for the W3C to understand that it has a hole in its participation and maybe create a kitty to help fund some of that travel too. But it would be it would still require front-end engineers and developers and designers to nominate the people that they would like to see filling those roles. So some organization is going to be required.
And it still takes time.
Hi, I'm Brad Hill. I'm the co-chair of the Web AppSec Working Group of the W3C, and I want to make a suggestion on that, is contribute test cases. That's something that every workgroup needs. Every workgroup is really glad to have. The spec isn't done until it has test cases covering everything. So if you're working on developing the test suite, it's not too late to change anything. It's a great way to get some hands-on experience in whatever size chunk you want to bite off of actually playing with the API. And the members of the working group are going to be so happy to have that feedback from people contributing test cases. If you say, hey, this test works, but this API is really stupid now that I've worked on it, you'll be one of the first people who've ever worked on it, and that feedback is going to have a lot of impact. And you don't have to be a member, you don't have to sign up, you don't have to make any IPR commitments to help out writing tests. So it's a great way to learn about the new things that are coming in the web platform and make a big difference.
And it's a way to take a small chunk out of the bigger spec to get started. Good suggestion. All right, Charles.
So I was going to say a couple of things. I'm the guy who chairs the Web Apps group, which made the decision to dump Web SQL and take up IndexedDB. And I chaired the meeting at which that happened, and I know squat about databases. Probably 3/4 of the people in this room know 10 times as much about databases as I do. But I was actually sitting in the meeting, and some of the people in there were really, really smart people, and some of them are like me. They don't know squat about databases. So some of the people who are there because their company paid for them, right? Not because they know anything. Don't feel like it's you in front of a panel full of real experts. That's not the case. And that's really important. How do you participate? As Alex said, organize. I mean, at one level, you can formally organize. At another level, find a friend. Right? Find someone who's got a bit more time and get them to go and talk about it to someone, or who's a bit better at explaining or a bit better connected. That's a useful thing. The W3C recognizes this problem, and the question that I guess was Tim asked was the thing I was going to ask. It's like, we're doing stuff on GitHub and we're using Discourse and we're using all of these things. The real question is, what is it that you guys can use? What tools makes it easy for us to get your input? Because I would have loved to have had a whole pile more input on the IndexedDB thing. And I don't know everyone in the world. I don't speak every language. I don't live in every country. But it's actually difficult to get people to come in. And it turns out that if you do come and talk to us, there are a few people you'll find who put up great big walls and are really like, no, fuck off, you're not an expert. There's actually a lot of people who are really friendly and really helpful and really welcome your input. So if you get knocked back the first time, write that person off and go and find someone else, because your input will come through if we can get it. Most of us are begging for it.
Thank you.
Yeah, if a small addition, when I raised the hand before, it was actually about education, and then you talked about all these initiatives. And I think it's all our jobs to take back from, like, because I personally, I didn't have any idea how to start a process to take part in this. And actually, I think a lot of it is like psychological, that a lot of people just see it as like standards evolving somewhere from the browser vendors, and they come to us, and then we have to live with it, and then the wrong one wins, and we're just mad. We should get excited about being able to maybe change that ourselves, and that's like the education we have to give to everyone we know now, that we get involved, right? So.
Tell everyone you know.
Hi, I'm Nico Hagenburger. I'm freelance front-end developer and designer from Berlin, mostly working with style guides. And I got involved in the W3C just a little bit, but I think at one point that was a good job. It was just a questionnaire. Do you like this way, or that way? It was about margins in Flexbox. Should the height be depend on the width, the margin be depending on the width or the height of the box? It was super easy. Everybody can have an opinion. It was a really good question. And after that, I feel like, hey, I contributed something. And it was anonymous. I just did it. But I think it feels like it's rarely happen, or maybe it's totally invisible. So I tweeted about that, but I think nobody else mentioned that. And it would be good just like to do this more often. I think there are also little questions where it could be A or B, both is good. And yeah, next time maybe I comment on something, hopefully.
Hi, I just want to say 3 things quickly. First, with reference to the people who stand up and say, fuck off, you're not an expert, I'd like to say a specific thank you to Tim for exemplifying exactly the opposite of that every time you've taken part in the little bits of standards processes that I've seen. So thank you. Second, I just wanted to echo what Alex was saying about sort of the struggle of being smaller. I mean, not that you're from a smaller player, but like the struggle of smaller players taking part in the standards process is real. We're a non-profit of 13 people. It's really tough to justify the time spent in meetings, and especially face-to-face meetings. I don't really have any solutions to this, but I think, you know, we are in the particular area that we're working. You know, we are one of the people working on an implementation that I think is probably furthest along. I'm probably biased, but that's my impression. And it's a real struggle to find enough time to contribute meaningfully to the standards process, where we have, you know, some concerns about where things are going, but can't really, you know, invest the time to actually change it. So I think that specifically your point about mailing lists being an environment that rewards those with the most time and those with the sort of fastest typing skills rather than those with the best ideas is a real problem. And the last thing, very briefly, I feel like the role of the staff contacts in the working group cannot be, like the importance of that role cannot be understated, because they are the facilitators to the pre-existing body of standards, to what has already been agreed upon, to where recommendations of best practices have already been made. And my brief, limited experience of this process is that good facilitation from those people can be fantastic. Less good facilitation from those people can be, shall we put it, less good. And it might be worth your, I guess I'm speaking more to W3C management than the tag, but it might be worth having a little bit more oversight over some of that process, in my experience.
So I just want to say one thing. When you say it's difficult to justify getting involved with standards, I'd say make the effort to find that justification, because especially if you're a small company and you're competing against 20 other companies and many of them very large companies, if the way a standard goes, if it could go A or B, and B destroys your company, but A makes you win over your competition, why weren't you involved in making that decision happen? That could be the life or death of your company, the life or death of your product. So why aren't you spending 25% of your time influencing that decision?
So thanks for pointing out that thanks for the compliment. Thanks for pointing out also the crucial role of the staff contact. So or the staff contacts, of course, the report to the management, like the domain leads. The main leads and everybody in the management and other staff. Well, if you feel that there is a staff contact who is doing a good job but could do with a little bit of guidance, maybe, or something like that, then I think you should find people. It's worth mentioning it. Certainly, we can all do with from time to time with tips and so on that we can pass on to colleagues, because the staff contacts can end up being sort of ending up misinformed about what's the most important thing to do and so on, what sort of attitude they should have and things like that. But in general, yes, I think it is a very important thing. Do send us feedback. I was going to say in general, looking at this group, W3C, the working groups in W3C turnover. People feel that they're just a front-end developer, then they feel that they're just a newbie, and then they feel that they're suddenly find themselves being a little frustrated by how little other people on the list have understood about the subject, and so rapidly, in fact, that you're not just a front-end developer, you're a front-end developer that happens to turn up for one or other reason this evening. And you sat for 2 hours of us talking about this stuff. So you're not just a front-end developer. You are potential fodder, not just for sending. You shouldn't just be sending comments. You may just want to send comments, but you may also be playing a significant role. You might end up editing things. You might end up chairing things. You might end up helping us redesign the process in all kinds of cool ways. You may end up developing tools. So that. You should feel that W3C is you really already. It's fit in the way you can. If you don't have the time, sometimes compartmentalizing, giving yourself Thursday or giving yourself Monday or something, or giving yourself all the time before 9 o'clock in the morning or something. Or wait, different people have different techniques. Yes, for some people they really don't have time, but there are lots of there's lots of good ammunition. For example, the arguments like that about not getting behind the competition that you can use when you're persuading the people that you work with that one of you needs to be present in this and involved.
Sorry, I'm going to cut this off here. This is a fantastic ending to this. We've been at it for 2 hours. We planned for 1 hour. We have another hour in this venue. There's cold drinks in the back. There's some food. We can continue this discussion one-on-one and in small groups. So I'd like to thank everyone here for fantastic questions. I would never have imagined. But thank you for putting my trust to work.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for coming.
And special thanks to the TAG working group for answering all these really hard questions and sitting in the limelight for like 2 hours. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Jan, for organizing it and for being awesome. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Right, that's it. Thanks. Thanks.
My knees are having trouble with all the sitting.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, thank you.
We copied it directly.
Sorry, I'll go back again.
We were very, very lucky with the dynamic of everything.
Yeah. Good audience. Great audience.
So you were like questions are actually pretty much the question is I don't think it's